Remember when one movie somehow managed to be the biggest event in Hollywood history before it even finished filming? In 1939, Selznick International Pictures released Gone with the Wind, the greatest Civil War epic that Hollywood had ever produced. Starring Vivien Leigh as the fiercely determined Scarlett O'Hara, Clark Gable as the charmingly ruthless Rhett Butler, Olivia de Havilland as the endlessly patient Melanie Hamilton, Hattie McDaniel in her legendary role as the protective Mammy, and Leslie Howard as Ashley Wilkes, a man that Scarlett spent 4 hours obsessing over, and the rest of us spent 4 hours trying to understand why. And today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Gone with the Wind that prove that this classic was every bit as dramatic off-screen as it was on it. And stick around for number one, because history was made at the biggest award show in Hollywood, and Hollywood, well, they somehow managed to make it shameful at the same time. Now, before we get into it, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps YouTube put this in front of more classic film fans who'd want to see it. Hope you're ready. If not, well, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Let's head to Georgia. Number 15. They lit half of Hollywood on fire before casting their lead. The production of Gone with the Wind was launched on December 10th of 1938 with the burning of Atlanta, one of the largest, most expensive sequences in the entire film. Scarlett O'Hara, the character at the center of every frame of that sequence, hadn't been cast yet. Rhett Butler was handled. Clark Gable was signed and confirmed, and far too valuable to put anywhere near a genuine inferno. So stunt legend Yakima Canutt stepped in as his body double. The lead actress was a different matter entirely, which meant the most pivotal scene in the film went forward with a stand-in running through actual flames where the main character was supposed to be. The flames were real. Selznick burned down 20 years worth of old movie sets on the 40 acres backlot, including the Great Wall built for 1927 King of Kings, which was later reused for King Kong. The flames hit an estimated 500 feet. Culver City residents flooded the phone lines, convinced that the studio had genuinely gone up in smoke. And that was a reasonable interpretation of what they were seeing. The operation behind it was actually much more controlled than it looked. Gas pipes and valves let the crew modulate the burn. Fire crews with water cannons stood by throughout. And the sequence worked pretty well. Selznick permanently erased pieces of early Hollywood history, filmed the whole thing without his lead actress under contract, and produced one of the most celebrated shots in cinema history. Number 14. Too British, too determined, too good to be ignored. David O. Selznick interviewed over 1,400 women to find his Scarlett O'Hara. The search ran for months. It cost approximately $100,000 and generated enough press coverage to make it the most talked about casting hunt in Hollywood history. America watched the whole thing unfold in real time. Vivien Leigh, she watched it too, and already decided that it was hers. The conventional wisdom was loud and unified. No British actress could play a Southern belle. The industry wasn't having the conversation. Leigh was already connected to Selznick's brother Myron through his talent agency, which gave her a foot in the door, even if nobody had opened it for her yet. So she traveled to Hollywood, where Olivier was already filming Wuthering Heights, arrived prepared, and waited for her moment. And when Myron walked her onto the burning Atlanta set and introduced her to David with, quote, "I want you to meet your Scarlett O'Hara," it landed less like a discovery and more like a confirmation. The woman the industry said was too British to play a Southern belle went on to deliver one of the most celebrated performances in film history. Number 13. Katharine Hepburn walked in certain and walked out humiliated. Katharine Hepburn didn't audition for Scarlett O'Hara. She declared herself Scarlett O'Hara. She lobbied Selznick directly, enlisted George Cukor, who was firmly in her corner, and at some point walked up to the producer and announced, "I am Scarlett O'Hara. The role is practically written for me." Selznick looked her over and replied, quote, "I can't imagine Rhett Butler chasing you for 12 years. He had two specific problems with her, and he wasn't shy about either one. The first was commercial. By 1938, Hepburn had officially been labeled box office poison by the Independent Theater Owners Association after a string of underperforming films. Selznick was already sinking millions into the most expensive production of his career. Adding a star that the industry had publicly written off, that was a risk that he had no interest in taking. The second problem is a bit harder to argue with. Selznick felt that Hepburn didn't project the kind of irresistible magnetism that would make a man like Rhett Butler lose his mind over a woman for more than a decade. She had the fire, arguably too much of it, but not what Selznick was looking for. He offered her a screen test to prove him wrong, and she turned it down. Hepburn walked in certain that she'd already won, declined the one chance to make her case on camera, and walked out with a one-liner that she'd be hearing about for the rest of her career. Number 12. The King of Hollywood almost quit over 4 seconds of crying. Clark Gable had spent his entire career avoiding tears on screen. When the script for Gone with the Wind required Rhett Butler to break down after Scarlett's miscarriage, a word, incidentally, that the Hays Code wouldn't even allow in the dialogue, so they called it a, quote, accident.
It's because I'm going to have a baby.
Well, cheer up. Maybe you'll have an accident.
Gable's position was immediate and unambiguous. Absolutely not. Selznick made the case. Fleming backed it up. And de Havilland talked him down personally, telling him directly, "You can do it. I know you can do it. And you will be wonderful." The solution was a compromise. They would film the scene twice, one with Gable fully committed to the emotion, and one with his back to the camera, preserving whatever remained of his cold, ultra-masculine dignity. Both versions were captured, no one walked off the set, and the production continued. Gable watched the footage and acknowledged that Selznick had been right. The emotional version was stronger. He threatened to walk off one of the biggest productions in Hollywood history over a few seconds of crying. He watched the playback once and changed his mind. The scene stayed, and so did he. Number 11. The most romantic scene in the film was flagged as a crime. The staircase scene is one of the most recognizable images in Hollywood history. Rhett grabs Scarlett, sweeps her up, carries her up that grand staircase while the orchestra swells, and the screen cuts to black. The Production Code Administration's Joseph Breen had a different description. His specific terminology for the scene was, quote, husbandly rape. Now, under the Hays Code, sexual violence on screen, that's strictly banned. Breen had been objecting to the scene since 1937, 2 years before the film even released. The scene survived because Selznick kept everything implied. Rhett carries Scarlett through the doorway, screen goes dark, which gives it just enough cover to get through. Breen was, by most accounts, surprisingly lenient.
You will understand that our Production Code Administration is not a one-man censorship. It represents the considered judgment of many persons.
The implications stayed fully intact. The morning after sequence shows Scarlett waking up visibly content. The film presents this cheerfully, as though the censorship office hadn't spent the better part of 2 years arguing over what the previous scene actually was. The people arguing about it in 1939 and the people arguing about it now are essentially having the same conversation. It's been running for 85 years and shows no sign of a resolution that anybody can agree on. Number 10. Same film, wildly different paychecks. Vivien Leigh appeared in roughly 61% of a nearly 4-hour film. She worked approximately 125 days on set. Her total salary for carrying Gone with the Wind on her back from start to finish was $25,000, breaking down to about $200 a day. Clark Gable was present for roughly 30% of the film. He worked 71 days, and he took home $120,000, approximately $1,690 a day. The math? It's not subtle. Gable was the king of Hollywood, the most famous male star on the planet. His standard MGM rate alone ran around $4,000 a week. Selznick wanted him badly enough to meet it. Leigh, by contrast, had basically just beaten out all of Hollywood for the role, and the industry's takeaway from that was not that she was extraordinary. It was that she was a British newcomer who got lucky. That perception translated directly into leverage, of which she had essentially none. Selznick locked her into a restrictive 7-year contract to go along with the $25,000. Gable earned more money for doing less than half the work. Leigh earned a fraction of that for doing most of it. Now, by the standards of the Hollywood star system in 1939, none of this really registered as particularly remarkable. Gable was a guaranteed box office commodity, and Leigh was considered fortunate to be employed. Number 9. The cast didn't want the roles, and the author didn't want the film. Leslie Howard was 46 years old playing Ashley Wilkes, a character written to be in his early 20s. His personal assessment of the role was a, quote, dreadful milksop. He hadn't read the book, he didn't want the part, and he only agreed after Selznick threw in a co-producer credit on Intermezzo, a project that Howard actually cared about. The moment his scenes wrapped, he left for England and skipped the Atlanta premiere entirely. Clark Gable's reluctance ran deeper than the crying scene. He didn't want to play Rhett Butler at all. Expectations were so astronomically high that he figured that there was no version where he came out ahead. But he signed on for one reason. He needed the bonus money to finalize a costly divorce and marry Carole Lombard. So one of the most celebrated performances in Hollywood history really began as a personal budget calculation. And then you had Margaret Mitchell, who sold the rights for $50,000 and wanted nothing to do with the production. She refused to write the screenplay and kept her distance throughout. When pressed on who should play Rhett Butler, she suggested Groucho Marx. That answer, it tells you exactly how seriously she was engaging with the question. One star thought the role was beneath him, another needed the paycheck, and the author was bracing for complaints before filming even started. Number 8. 3 directors, 16 writers, and somehow a masterpiece. The movie went through at least 16 writers trying to get the script into shape. 16. Among them was F. Scott Fitzgerald, who came, wrote, and left without a single screen credit to show for it. Things got bad enough that Selznick called a full script emergency mid-production and summoned screenwriter Ben Hecht to fix it. Hecht rewrote the entire first half of the script in roughly 5 to 7 days. He sustained himself on bananas and salted peanuts throughout. I call that less of a writing process and more like a hostage situation with snacks, but whatever. The director situation was its own separate catastrophe. George Cukor had spent 2 years in pre-production. He lasted 18 days of actual shooting before Selznick fired him. Victor Fleming came in as replacement. Fleming was a capable, experienced director and handled one of the largest productions in Hollywood history. And Selznick proceeded to micromanage every line, every shot, and every frame with such intensity that Fleming eventually suffered a breakdown from exhaustion and had to take 2 weeks off. A third director, Sam Wood, was brought in to keep the production moving while Fleming recovered. The final tally: 3 directors, 16 plus writers, a producer who treated the entire enterprise as his personal creative domain, and a script that had been through enough hands to qualify as a relay race. The chaos was total. The outcome became a masterpiece. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this trip back to old Hollywood drama, hit that like button and subscribe. We dig up the stories behind the biggest films and shows that you grew up with. And share this with a fellow classic film fan. And if you've ever powered through something on sheer stubbornness alone, well, as Scarlett herself once put it, as God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. We'll be right back with more. Now let's get back to the mess, because Scarlett's world, it was just getting started. Number 7, the most expensive gamble in Hollywood history. Gone with the Wind cost approximately $3.85 million to produce, equivalent to somewhere north of $70 million today. Now, at the time of its release, only Ben-Hur in 1925 had definitively spent more, though Howard Hughes had been loudly claiming for nearly a decade that Hell's Angels cost even more. Whether you believed Hughes was another matter entirely. The scale alone was staggering. Over 2,400 people worked on the production. Somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million feet of Technicolor film was shot. And Technicolor in 1939 was still very much an experiment, one that came with a price tag to match every frame of uncertainty. There were exactly 7 Technicolor cameras in existence at the time. Selznick rented all 7 for the Atlanta sequence because he intended to capture every angle of it simultaneously. Then came the problem of Scarlett's eyes. Margaret Mitchell's novel had established them as a striking shade of green, but Vivien Leigh's eyes were a natural blue-gray. The solution was to engineer the correct color through sheer technical effort. Makeup artist Monty Westmore lined her eyes with heavy green shadow. The camera team ran specific color filters to pull out whatever green they could coax from the film stock. Lighting setups were adjusted specifically to support the effect. The budget? Enormous. The technology was barely mature enough to handle what they were asking of it. And the entire production was a calculated bet that the finished product would justify every dollar of it. Number 6, a movie premiere so big, the governor shut down the state. The world premiere of Gone with the Wind took place in Atlanta on December 15th of 1939, and the governor, Uriah D. Rivers, declared it an official state holiday. Mayor William B. Hartsfield had been planning considerably longer than that. He organized a full 3-day celebration around the premiere. Parades, a costumed Old South ball, citywide decorations. On top of the state holiday, the governor had already declared. The crowds matched the ambition. An estimated 300,000 people lined 7 miles of streets to watch limousines carrying the cast roll through the city. Another 18,000 gathered outside the theater on premiere night alone. To put that in perspective, the entire population of Atlanta in 1939 was about 300,000 people, meaning that the city had essentially cloned itself in spectators for that occasion. Before global simultaneous releases, Gone with the Wind turned a December movie opening in Atlanta into one of the largest public events in American history. Number 5, one line nearly got cut from the most famous exit in film history. 4 hours of war, obsession, survival, and emotional wreckage, and it all comes down to 8 words: "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." The line is perfect, and it also is Selznick's invention. Mitchell's novel simply reads, "My dear, I don't give a damn." Selznick added "frankly" at the front, specifically to soften the "damn" at the end. It worked on the censors, barely. What actually happened with the censors is slightly more complicated than the legend. Just before the film's release, the Hays Code was quietly amended to permit damn or hell when considered essential to a historical portrayal or drawn directly from a literary source. Now, Selznick's argument that the line was both suddenly had just enough room to land. The scene itself had been filmed on June 10th of 1939 during principal photography. It was never a last-minute addition or a post-production fix. It was always there, it was always intentional, and always being fought over simultaneously. The $5,000 fine is the part of the story that gets repeated most often. Historians have questioned whether the fine was actually ever levied, given the timing of the Code Amendment, but Selznick leaned into the controversy either way. The outrage generated publicity, and the publicity, well, that sold tickets, and the line stayed in the film exactly as written. Number 4, Rhett Butler's breath was the real villain of this love story. The romance between Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler is one of the most celebrated in cinema history. But behind the scenes, Vivien Leigh spent a significant portion of it trying to get through the kissing scenes as quickly and professionally as possible. In 1933, 6 years before filming, Gable developed severe periodontal disease that resulted in the extraction of nearly all his teeth. By the time he was playing Rhett Butler, he'd been wearing full dentures for years. Chronic halitosis was a direct consequence. Gable was also a heavy smoker, which attached itself to the dentures and compounded the situation pretty considerably. Leigh did not romanticize any of this in private. Her exact assessment, kissing Clark Gable in Gone with the Wind was not that exciting. His dentures smelled something awful, which reframes every swelling orchestra close-up in the film rather significantly. The camera was capturing chemistry. Leigh was trying to get through the take, hold the performance, and manage the breathing pretty strategically. Number 3, the closing line accidentally meant everything. Gone with the Wind doesn't end with a reunion or resolution. It ends with Scarlett O'Hara standing alone, having lost virtually everything and delivering one quiet line before the screen goes dark. After all, tomorrow is another day. That line almost became the title of the entire film. Mitchell's publisher pushed hard for Tomorrow is Another Day. Mitchell chose Gone with the Wind instead, pulling the phrase from Ernest Dowson's poem, Sinara, understanding that the title needed to tell you what was lost and let the final line tell you what comes next. No marketing campaign could have engineered what the film's release timing did to that line. Gone with the Wind premiered months after World War II had begun in Europe. American audiences were still climbing out of a decade of economic collapse. Scarlett's refusal to quit landed with the specific weight of people who already knew personally what losing everything felt like. In Britain, the resonance ran deeper. The film ran continuously in London for 4 straight years, straight through the Blitz. Audiences watched a woman survive the total destruction of her world while their own cities were being taken apart overhead. It stopped being fiction somewhere around 1941. Number 2, Hollywood was warned. Hollywood didn't listen. Before Gone with the Wind screened a single frame, the NAACP was already on record. Executive Secretary Walter White told Selznick directly that the film would function as lost cause propaganda, romanticizing the Confederacy while presenting slavery scrubbed clean of its actual horror. The Pittsburgh Courier was running editorials before production even wrapped, specifically targeting the racial slur that appeared in the script and demanding it be removed. Selznick made some adjustments. The Ku Klux Klan was removed by name from the script. Racial slurs were cut. He also brought on technical advisors to make sure that black characters were represented more fairly. Both advisors he hired were white. The surface was adjusted. The story underneath stayed intact. In 2020, HBO Max pulled Gone with the Wind entirely before returning it with a historical disclaimer addressing the exact racist depictions that protesters had identified 81 years earlier. Hollywood listened just enough in 1939 to adjust the surface. The disclaimer was essentially the rest of the argument, finally appended decades late. And number 1, Hattie McDaniel's historic win and Hollywood's shameful response. On February 29th of 1940, Hattie McDaniel became the first African-American in history to win an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress.
This is one of the happiest moments of my life, and I want to thank each one of you who had a part in selecting me for one of the awards.
The venue was the Coconut Grove nightclub in the Ambassador Hotel, which had a strict policy that prohibited black guests. Selznick had to call in a personal favor just to get her inside. That sentence should not exist, yet here we are. She got in, but with conditions. Vivien Leigh, Clark Gable, and Olivia de Havilland sat together near the stage at Selznick's table. McDaniel was escorted to a separate table set against the far wall, where she spent the evening watching the ceremony from across the room from the cast that she'd made it with. When her name was called, she walked up and delivered an acceptance speech of complete and total grace.
I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry. My heart is too full to tell you just how I feel. And may I say thank you, and God bless you.
A sentiment that lands considerably differently, knowing what her evening had already looked like. Now, after the ceremony, her co-stars went to celebrate at another venue. That venue also didn't allow black guests, so McDaniel didn't go. She won the highest honor in film gave one of the most dignified speeches in Oscar history, and Hollywood celebrated by going somewhere she wasn't permitted to follow. The industry threw itself quite a party that night, but it just didn't include everyone who earned one. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Gone with the Wind. Which one surprised you the most? Subscribe and share this with someone who loves classic Hollywood. And until next time, tomorrow is another day. This is Remember When.